Alright, so today we're going to talk about the mammalian system that we're going to study, which is the circulatory system, and it's a system that's present in some heterotrophs, right? So things that don't produce their own energy, they have to consume their own energy, okay? One of the classics, two blood cells met and fell in love, but alas, it was all in vain. So have a go at doing these three quick questions. Pause the video here. Alright, so let's have a look at these three quick questions. What are they asking? So first one says, compare and contrast photosynthetic autotrophs and chemosynthetic autotrophs. So if we're contrasting them, we're looking at differences. So the difference, so contrast, the difference is that one undergoes photosynthesis, which means that we are getting photosynthesis, means we're getting our energy from light, all right? And the other one is going to undergo chemosynthesis, which means that we're actually getting our energy this time from inorganic chemicals, right? Inorganic molecule, cannot spell, molecules. All right, if we're comparing, if we're seeing if two things, how are they alike? They're both autotrophs, which means they produce own glucose. Cool. Hopefully you got those. So, glucose and ATP are both energy-rich molecules, but they're also very different. Explain how glucose and ATP are different in terms of the biological importance for living organisms. All right, so when we want to compare two things together like this in these type of questions, we want to talk about the similarities and difference between. We want to talk about how they're actually different. All right, so glucose and ATP are both energy-rich molecules, but ATP is a source of fast energy. When we're breaking down that bond between the second and third phosphate, we're getting really fast energy, right? Glucose, on the other hand, is technically an energy storage molecule. Not long-term storage, but it is energy storage. Once again, looking at more differences. So what's one difference similarity between active transport and facilitated diffusion? Difference, if we're talking about difference, the energy requirement. So energy requirement, so you should write that facilitated diffusion doesn't need energy. On the other hand, active transport requires energy. Similarity, the use of transport proteins is the similarity. So they both use carrier proteins. Only facilitated diffusion really uses channel proteins, but they both use transport proteins, which is that grouping of proteins. Alright, so in the study design, we're actually looking at functioning systems, and we sort of get to pick one selected mammalian system, okay? And we're actually picking this guy over here, the circulatory system, and there's a very specific reason why, and the reason is that I think it's the most interesting one. No, but it's actually the reason why is because it's really important in terms of energy systems, so it links in really closely with what we talk about in bio, and so it's very, very useful in that. So we don't study these guys. You're more than welcome to go out and study about those three, but we are going to focus on theirs. But we're going to focus on how cells in the systems are specialized and organized. So cells into tissues, tissues into organs, organs into systems. How a specific malfunction, so we're going to look at how things can go wrong, can lead to biological consequences, and how the system is interconnected to other systems. So we do have to understand what the other systems do. We don't have to know about specifics about them, okay? Well, and it's all about the survival of organisms, cool? All right, so let's look at organization of multicellular organisms. We're going to sort of ignore this plant part for now, but we're going to look at the animal section because that's what we're going to be focused on. So animals are made up of cells, as we hopefully already know that, right? Animals are made up of individual cells. If all of these individual cells, if we grab a bunch that are the same type, okay, cells that are carrying out the same function and group them together, we get what we call a tissue. So for example, here we've got some muscular tissue, okay? If we were to take different kinds of tissues and group those together, we get what we call an organ. Okay, so here we've got the brain. The brain is made up of white matter, dark matter, all right? So it's made up of neurons, which is the types of cells forming a tissue. It's made up of different ganglion cells, all right? So it's all of these different kind of cells, different kind of tissues. So that's why it's called an organ, okay? Lots and lots of organs put together is going to form an organ system, or a system, usually what we call it. So examples, respiratory, excretory, transport system, okay? A good example of this in terms of the nervous system is you've got your brain, you've got your spinal cord, but you've also got your peripheral nervous system, for example. All right, and then if we take all our systems, we put them together, we actually make them work together, you're going to get an organism like us, a nice little rat. Okay. So let's look at some more cellular organization. So mammalian organisms are organized based on very specific functions, with very specific cells forming very specific tissues, all right, and this is all stemming from stem cells, and that worked out well, and stem cells undergo a process that we call differentiation, all right, and through differentiation, they specialize into things like muscle cells, blood cells, nerve cells, and so on and so on, okay? Let's look at now the type of different mammalian tissues that these cells can get together to form. So there's 4 major kinds of tissues can be identified in mammals. These tissues come together to make up those organs and consequently the systems of animals. All right, the first kind is epithelial. Epithelial comes from the word outside, so they line all the cavities in your body. So this is the lining of your whole intestine and your whole digestive tract, your trachea, okay, but also your skin, that's epithelial tissue, all right, the inside of your mouth, epithelial tissue, okay, cool. Muscle tissue is the next kind of tissue, so this is tissue that's actually able of contraction and movement. So your heart, we're going to look at this quite a bit, your biceps, for some of us. Connective tissues is binding and supporting tissue. So loose connective tissue holds the outer layers of the skin to underlying muscle, or else your skin would, if you pulled it, you'd be able to sort of like pull it off, which wouldn't be good. And connective tissue joining bones, for example. So for, what's that called? Cartilage, that's it. And we've got things like nervous tissue, which is tissue that acts to receive external stimuli and transmit nervous impulses and means that I can move my hands. So here's the mammalian tissues. Okay, so we've got epithelial tissue, for example, your skin, muscle tissue, for example, some people's biceps, nervous tissue, you can find that everywhere in your body that you can feel anything, there's nervous tissue there, and then we've got connective tissues, lots of different types of connective tissues. All right, so these mammalian systems, it's really important to know that they don't act by themselves. So although we often study them by themselves, we'll study the skeletal system in PA, or we'll study the muscular system in PA, they work really closely together, okay? For example, the circulatory system is actually regulated by the brain, okay? And the circulatory system receives oxygen through the respiratory system and transports nutrients received by the digestive system. Okay, so it's a constant interaction of these systems that's vital to our survival. So let's look at some of these roles of the circulatory system. So it's a mechanism really of transport, okay, and it's quite complex and it's quite either direct or indirect sometimes, all right, but it's certainly essential for survival of any complex organism, okay. So the circulatory system, we usually think of the circulatory system in terms of transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide. And yes, for sure, it receives oxygen from the respiratory system and it brings carbon dioxide to the respiratory system. And it's a very important role. But also, whenever I eat anything, all right, and that glucose gets broken up in my digestive system, the food, so the glucose that I pull out of my food is going to actually travel from the digestive system into the bloodstream to, for example, your liver for storage or to your muscles for use. Okay? Once that glucose is actually broken down and other nutrients are broken down, all right, we actually put those nutrients into our circulatory system, and that those nutrients are then traveled, for example, into our kidney and such, and then we actually excrete those nutrients that we don't need anymore. Okay, and then finally, one of the extremely important examples of use of the circulatory system is the movement of our immune cells. So all of our white blood cells, they're the ones that fight off bacteria and pathogens. They actually travel mainly through our circulatory system in our body to fight those things, okay? All right, so let's look at some of the features of the circulatory system. Probably the one major muscular feature of the circulatory system, first thing we think about is the heart, and really all the heart is our pump. Okay, like our aquaculture system, it's got that big pump that pumps the water around. The heart just pumps the blood around our body. Okay, the tubes of the circulatory system, or the vessels, are arteries, arterioles, veins, and venules. All right, and these forms the channels which carries the blood throughout our body. Okay, and then lastly, what we have is our capillary network, and this is the site where material actually gets exchanged between the blood and the cells. Okay. All right, let's have a look at this transport system that uses the blood. So if we looked at blood when we pull it out, and I know a few people don't really like doing this, this is what it looks like. If we take our blood and run it through a centrifuge, okay, nice fresh blood, this is what we actually get, okay? So our blood is actually 45% formed elements, and these are pretty much the cells that make up our bloods, all right? And 55% of our blood is actually plasma, which is actually mostly water. Okay, so most of our blood is made up of water, but it's also contains some proteins and then some things such as other solutes, so other things that are mixed into electrolytes, nutrients, gases, weights, vitamins, so lots of different stuff. Those formed elements, we're going to talk about red blood cells. There's millions of red blood cells. So if you actually go, each time you do that, you have 2 million red blood cells dying and 2 million red blood cells in your body actually gaining a new life, okay? So we've also got platelets, which are the ones that allow your blood to coagulate, and white blood cells, which are in the thousands, which are the guys that fight off infection. All right, so one of these major roles of the circulatory system is to move what we call oxygen-rich or oxygenated blood, which we usually represent in red, all right, from the lungs, so because we're breathing it in, taking it into the lungs, all right, runs around our body and then bring back the oxygen poor or deoxygenated blood back to the lungs so that we can breathe it out, okay? Oxygen-rich blood, we often represent this as red, like I said, and deoxygenated blood is often represented as blue. It's not actually red and blue. They do actually look slightly different, but not that different, okay? All right, so these are the two main vessels, well, three vessels that transport blood in our body. All right, these are the arteries. All right, small arteries are termed arterioles, and small veins are termed venules. Okay, same structure. Let's look at arteries first. Arteries have really thick walls. Okay, the reason they have really thick walls is because the blood is going to flow through them extremely fast, high pressure blood. The heart's really pumping that blood through. Okay, and it's going to run through from a heart always. So arteries are away from the heart, so away, and it's going to run to our body. Okay, and then veins are going to take blood from our body and take it back to the heart. Okay. So this is going to go towards the heart. Veins, on the other hand, they have a much thinner wall, okay? And the blood is running at a very much slower speed through there, right? And it can actually even go in the opposite direction. To not allow this blood to go the opposite direction, we have these valves in our veins, right? And they pretty much open up when the blood's going in. So allow the blood to go towards the heart, but will close up if the blood is actually trying to go away from the heart, okay? In our body, so this is actually representing our body, where these arteries and veins get really, really tiny, they become what we call capillaries, right? And what capillaries actually are, they're a tube that's actually made up of a single layer of cell. All right. So if we're thinking about our diffusion and active transport and all those movements across a cell membrane, this is actually what's happening in the capillaries. So for example, if there's glucose in the capillaries and we want it outside of the blood, that glucose is going to pass through the capillaries through facilitated diffusion because it's only going through a single layer of cell. Okay. The capillaries, that's literally what they are. If you can imagine cells, like single layers of cells enveloping to form a tiny little tube system, okay? All right, let's talk about the heart more. The heart's very interesting because it's located at the very center of our chest, and we consider this very important because it's going to pump that oxygenated blood around the body and deoxygenated blood to the lungs so we can get rid of it. Okay, this is how the heart pumps. Okay, it is at the very center of our chest. We say it's on the left-hand side because if you look, the left-hand side of the heart is bigger than the right-hand side, and we'll talk about why that is. Okay, but let's have a further look into the heart. So here we've got this little graphic that shows us the heart pumping. Okay, so the heart is right in front of the lungs, which I'm not going to draw because that's going to throw us off a bit, right? But how the heart works is we've got the right-hand side of the heart is on this side, and the left-hand side of the heart is on this side, which is a bit confusing, but if you take your screen and you put it in front of you, you'll notice that that makes sense, all right? If the right-hand side is on this side and the left-hand side is on this side here, okay? So at the very top of the heart, we have what we call the atria or the atrium, all right? So here we have the left atrium, and here we have the right atrium. Okay, and then the bottom part of the heart is what we call the ventricles. So here we have left ventricle and the right ventricle. Okay, in between the atria and the ventricles and in where the exits of the hearts are, you're going to find what we call valves, right? And these valves function just like the ones that are in our veins. They're just making sure that the blood is always pumping in the right direction. We can't get blood pumping in the opposite direction. That's very, very bad, all right? They all have different names, but I'm not going to expect you to remember all the name of the valves, all right? They're all like bicuspid and tricuspid, all right? Good fun to remember. All right, so let's run through the blood in the heart, okay? So we're always going to start in the lungs. So if you imagine that the lungs are out here, right, and the lungs are going to take in oxygenated blood, right? And that oxygenated blood is going to go into the left atrium first through these little holes, which are little entrances to the heart, all right? And that's going to be our very first vein, all right? So because we know it's a vein because it's going to the heart from the lungs, and it's called the pulmonary vein. Okay, pulmonary just means lung, okay? I think it's Latin. From the pulmonary vein, we're going to go into the left atrium. The left atrium literally just guzzles out its blood into the left ventricle. And then from the left ventricle, it goes, can you see this little valve here? And that valve goes up here and out this way to the body, Right? So we're taking oxygenated blood to the body, okay? And this passageway is actually our very biggest artery in our whole body. It's a huge artery that's called the aorta, okay? So the blood goes to the body, all right? So if you're imagining the body, so there's the body here, okay? Both the blood goes to your head and into your legs and all of that, right? From the body, the blood is going to then go back into the heart, except this time, because the body used all that oxygen in the blood, we're going to have deoxygenated blood coming back into the heart. Okay, that's why it's represented as blue. It's going to go into the body through what we call, in both the top and the bottom here, these two entrances, they're actually the same entrance, right? And this is called the vena cava, okay? And that's a type of vein because we're going towards the heart again, okay? In the vena cava, it's going to dump the blood into the right atrium. The right atrium dumps the blood into the right ventricle, and then the right ventricle shoots the blood back towards the lungs through what we call the pulmonary, so once again, pulmonary artery. A little bit of a mess there, all right? But now we're going to take the blood back to the lung, and then we're going to repeat that whole process again, okay? I recommend you print off a picture of the heart and actually try to label it like this in a much neater way than Mr. Mello did, but with these same ideas, all right? It's all of these points that I just talked about. All right, so now that we've talked about the circulatory system in the heart, lots and lots of things can go wrong with the circulatory system. Cardiac diseases, so diseases of the circulatory system, are actually still the #1 killer of people throughout the developed world. Okay, so these malfunctions in the circulatory system are really serious and really important to look at. Okay, we always categorize malfunctions by their affected area. So, for example, malfunctions of the heart. Okay, for example, if we have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, right, here we're getting a malfunction where we're getting a thickened ventricular septum, which is the muscle wall in the middle of the heart, in between the two, the right and the left hand side of the heart. All right, and this means that your left hand side of the heart can't pump properly, which is really dangerous because that's the side of the heart which is going to send blood to our body. Okay. Another kind of malfunction can be malfunctions of the blood vessels, for example, atherosclerosis, where we're getting plaque, which is usually fat-based, actually filling up our blood vessels, okay, and that means that blood can't flow properly through our blood vessels, okay, obviously another really bad one. And then lastly, we got issues of the actual blood. So a really great example of this is leukemia, which is a kind of cancer, right? And in leukemia, so where normal blood, most of the blood, like we talked about, it's made up of red blood cells. In leukemia, we have a ridiculous overproliferation of white blood cells called leukocytes. That's why it's called leukemia, all right? And that's going to be really bad because you're going to obviously not going to have the right amount of red blood cells if your whole blood is taken up by white blood cells, okay?